Good day, everybody. How's it going out there today? So, today we're going to talk about countries and laws. After all, this is called World in Review. After all, why would it be called World in Review if we just talked about the United States all the time? I wish it were more positive news in this case, but we're going to talk about that particular topic today. And more along the lines of a person who was a Russian government official making a tweet on the Twitters in which has been translated by a furry. And the reason that the furries were interested in translating this is not fortunately good news. So here we have the Russian Twitter account here, T-Journal, which is a Russian media thing, talking about the statement made by the chairman of Commission of Protecting Children from Destructive Content, which is quite a long title. My dang Yankee tongue is not going to be able to pronounce this correctly, so I'm going to say R-A-T. Zyganov. I could say Zyganov. Zyganov? I think that's how you pronounce the last name. So I'll just say Zyganov. Has proposed equating LGBT, furry, and child-free with extreme movements. So, of course, this has got a lot of furries concerned about the Russian furry community. Global Furry Television did a little bit on that, and he talked about the issue and the situation. So, obviously, that is of a grave concern. Russia, as a country, has been somewhat infamous for its treatment of people who are LGBT. Gays, lesbians, transsexuals, and queer folk. So obviously, them adding furries to the mix is always a little bit interesting, though furries have sort of planted themselves as sort of allies of people, have sort of seen themselves as sort of allies of those particular folks. And on at least on the social media space, right? How people front on social media versus how they behave in real life are two completely different things. But at least on social media and things like that, furries have really been people who have stuck their necks out for the progressive causes of people who are LGBT. So why all of a sudden has Russia gone all frustrated about this? Well, there's a worldwide issue going on right now, and that is a lot of mainstream countries are dealing with this issue of repopulation. Basically, similar to that utopian experiment with mice, which you can look up on YouTube. If you look at the perfect utopia and how these mice were given everything that they ever needed to survive, and yet they had that all of a sudden the population started to stagnate and decline, and people wonder if that's happening within our world as well, where despite all of the of the plentifulness and bountifulness of our world, we're starting to hit this point where, population is stagnating and may even start declining. And for a lot of first world countries, quote unquote, first world countries, that does seem to be the case. And that is irregardless of their positions on LGBT. But the Russian government here, when they make this policy position, particularly the thing that's telling on what they're the most worried about to me, reading this translation, is they're considering people who are being child-free as extremists, right? Coming from governments that a government that has accidentally shot down a passenger plane, taken over the Crimea Peninsula in I think it was 2014. Has been causing heck for Ukraine this whole time. in which they will be, but they will be pleased to know they've prevented furry conventions from happening in the Ukraine for like 2 years now. One for COVID, one for civil unrest. It's one of those things where it's like, you're calling us extreme, but I don't know any furries who were able to reroute a passenger plane and to basically, plant that passenger plane on the ground in the country to reroute it using the military things. But that might have been Belarus. I don't think that was Russia. I think that was Belarus. But nonetheless, governments have power, extreme power at times. Furries don't have all that much power. I don't even have 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. I don't have all that much power. But what I can tell you is this misconstruing of governmental support of LGBT items versus the fertility rates of the citizenry, while people may think on paper, oh, it's just obvious. It's like, well, if gay people weren't being so gay, then they would have straight things and they would have kids, right? It just makes sense on paper. But the statistics and the things show that these are not correlated ideals. And you can look that up yourself, and we can look that up right now using like basically Wikipedia. Okay, so I'm going to show you these statistics here, right? So we're going to remove this for right now. And I'm going to take off my head for a moment because I can't read this very thin text with my head on. So we're going to look at some examples of why this doesn't make sense. So we have 2 tabs here, and I'm going to close the rest of my tabs out. We have gay-friendly wiki thing here, which ranks countries on a scale of 1 to 202. And look at that, Chechnya, Russia. But that's only part of Russia. The whole of Russia is somewhere up here in the other things. But basically, to 202. So there's like a rank of 1 to 202 of the countries and how friendly they are engaged, from a total of 13 positive points to like 19 negative points right there. And then you also have this page, which is the list of sovereigns and dependencies by total fertility. Basically, this lists all these countries from top to bottom on fertility, from the top being Niger, going all the way down to South Korea at 208th. So, and then basically, another idea or point that you have to understand here is that this is the threshold that you are looking for as a government, is, are you replacing the population with your current breeding, right? Which is very nasty business to talk about people as if they're cattle to have husbandry over. But government's gonna government, and their governments are perverse. They like their populations breeding. So we're gonna say anything above here is a positive threshold. So what you're gonna notice here is that let's start with Russia, right? Since that's who we're talking about. You're going to notice that Russia is like down in 100. So basically, now that I'm moving down here, you're seeing like a 1.3 replacement thing. That's bad. It's 190. I thought it was 190s that it was in. What we can also do is we can use this thing up here. And make it faster, because that way I don't have to wait. 145th. I misremembered. So Russia is at 145th, but it's a 1.8. So that's still not very positive, right? And it's right along the United States as far as how much population it's getting in replacement there. So the United States and Russia are pretty much tied, even though they have pretty different gay friendliness. Russia being all the way down here in 176th, right, with negative 12 points on how positive they are towards GLBT folks. And the United States, they kind of do it in this sort of format. The worst it gets is a -2, right? So, like, if, gay folks in America think they have it bad, like, the worst states on this list are at a -2. Where in Russia, it's at a -12. That's 10 more points bad. And they go over how they calculate these points up top of this chart. Basically, anti-discrimination legislation. So basically, laws protecting, people like that, GLBT folks, if they're able to get married, if they're able to adopt, how transgendered it is. Basically, are they allowed, like, do they, allow for their forms to have a third option as far as, like, male, female, etc. Age of consent, basically conversion therapy, LGBT marketing. Then you have the negatives like anti-gay laws and, prides are banned, our locals hostile, prosecution, murders, and death sentences. So you can sort of see, like, how they kind of form these positives and negative opinions on these kind of things. And it looks like even if they don't allow those options, if they're very, like, if they allow conversion therapy, they'll do a -1. If they ban conversion therapy, they'll probably do a +1. Or if there's no laws or anything, they'll just keep it at a 0. Like, that's how these things are calculated. And that's where their source is. So basically, you can kind of get an assessment here on where that is. Now, the United States, obviously, it varies from state to state, but if you were to take an average of these things, it would probably be in the positive instead of the negative. Like, it looks like the average of this is above a 0. Even though, like, there's some negatives, the negatives don't go as positive as the positives do. So it would, if America were to be put on this kind of chart here, it would probably be like around 4 or so, probably around where Israel is. It must be noted that Israel is a good example of, it's like, okay, well, they do have some positives, they do have some negatives, but it's overall a lot further more, GLBT positive than Russia is. And if we look up Israel on this chart here that tells about fertility, then you get Israel's all the way up here at 3.0. So basically, Israel is far and away, it's above the world average. The world average right now is 2.4. The repopulation is 2.1. So the country wants to be above here if they're repopulating their citizens on their own without the need of immigration. Which, by the way, if you are one of these countries down here, the way you make up for the population gap is, immigration. And sometimes the best way to acquire immigration is to, not be so harsh to immigrants. Just saying. But unfortunately, Russia and the United States, I'm sure, are not too great to immigrants. Except, of course, if your name is Edward Snowden. And you just like basically stubbed the toes of one of your adversaries. But anyways, so you have Israel up here. So, like, they're in the, treating GLBT people not like common criminals. I don't know if that's true or not. I'd have to see what. Yeah. So they don't have any points in the red zones where they're actually got laws and stuff, and things like that. So yeah, United States is right here 4. So I was right. I didn't even mean to do that. I was like, I just looked at these numbers and I'm like, yeah, the average seems to be about 4. I think it's 4. And then it's like, yeah, it was. I didn't even realize the United States was listed up here as a country. Fun. Anyway, nerd. So yeah, you can kind of see, and now for most of these, to be fair, most of these, if you were to look these up, are under the under the concept of having less population growth than the population replacement. There are a lot of countries right now dealing with that situation. Like, I mean, you can see Iran here, right? So Mexico is actually relatively gay positive and Iran's not so much, but yet their population is basically, their population replacement is basically the same, right? And when I say Mexico, so you probably are wondering, I looked up this stuff a little bit before the video, which is why I'm not exactly bumbling about. So you have Mexico with positive 2 points, right? Not the greatest, right? It's worse than the United States and it's worse than Israel. But, you know, it's not negative. But if you go to Iran, you know, obviously, it's near the bottom of the list, guys. Like, this is, if there's any, like, thing to show that this correlation of the idea that if your country treats gay people like they're the devil, that somehow you'll all of a sudden have tanuki-like fertility in your country. Like, if there's any definitive proof, you have, like, here you have the United Emirates, right, at -14. You have Iran at -17. And Iran is barely keeping up with population replacement. And Mexico is basically tied with Iran as far as this thing goes. And, you know, and then if you look at the United Emirates, it's down here, right? But what I've noticed, at least from my idea and my perspective, like United Emirates is almost at the bottom of the population list at 1.4. And I scrolled that one because I knew that was there, because I looked at, as I said, I looked at all this stuff earlier. And so there's got to be something else going on here, right? There's got to be something else that's causing repopulation and birthing problems in these countries, rather than just it's furries or the LGBT. So anyone telling you otherwise is full of crap, because they can't even look at numbers. Like Poland's pretty anti-LGBT, and Poland's right there. See it? Hey, it's right next to the Netherlands, which is positive LGBT, right? So if you were to look up Poland here, is at 126th place at -8 points. And then I look up the Netherlands. Netherlands, go up. It's in 14th at 8. So you literally have a country that has -8 points, GLBT points, right? And one that has positive 8 GLBT points. And they're literally right next to each other on this list, with no points in between them. No difference between population growth. This is just blatantly unscientific. The furries are not causing population growth problems in your country. You know what's probably causing population growth problems in your country is that you have people who are presidents for life. And by the way, the American dream of, like, anyone can be president and anyone, like, everyone's starting to see that that's kind of hogwash and things like that. And there are freaking mainstream countries here who are more democratic and more authoritarian, so that are in this area. So even me saying that and saying, see, it's because you guys are being too harsh to your citizenry, there's no evidence of that. You have Switzerland, and you have, in Italy, and like, you have all these countries that are democratic, and you have all these other countries that are also that are basically not as democratic in this area, where you have Russia, and you have United Emirates, and you have, like, you have all these other countries here. You have North Korea, for crying out loud. This is a problem that is affecting varying different countries of varying different archetypes that are not being able to replace their population. So there has to be something else. It's not the furries. It's not even how the government is run. Like, as I said, there's, like, Iran's down here, right? So you have Iran, and you have, let's see. Actually, I think Iran was in the just replacing. Yeah. So, like, it's something else. But it's not what the Russian government thinks it is. It's like, people aren't having children. They're extremists. They're the ones that are going to be the future problems for our country. It's like, other countries are having the same problem you're having, Russia. And it's not us furries doing it. So cool your horses. I just think you know what I think it is. I think that they have somebody like advising them, and there are people that are advising people in the Russian government, and they are basically they don't have the Russian people's interests at heart. They have a different agenda. It was you, wasn't it? It was you two. You on your infinite hunt for moose and squirrel. You too. I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing. You're hunting Rocky and Bullwinkle, aren't you? Aren't you? That's what you want. See, now this is how ridiculous this is. Now that furries are considered an extremist group, now I've got to think that they're sending Russian spies after furries. And if they're sending Russian spies after furries, now I have to put Rocky and Bullwinkle into the non-fiction section. You realize how silly that is? How is hunting moose and squirrel going to help procreation? Tell me, Natasha, I don't know. I don't question it, honey. We need our money. Anyways, that's about it for that. I think I kind of went over my point over pretty exhaustively here. It's one of those things where we don't have much control over how our governments perceive things or how they think what the solutions to their problems are. Sometimes they do, sometimes they just come up with these weird ideas as to what's causing problems in the world and what people are more afraid of for their children. Ironically, I think more people these days are more concerned about how our government is impacting our planet and how our government is impacting the discourse between our friends and our family and how it's impacting our ability to get along as a species instead of dividing and conquering us into different cells and radicalizing us in different ways. I think that more than anything is causing infertility, because who besides somebody who is sadistic would want their children to inherit a world where angry old men behind desks in a building are trying to figure out how to get back at the other guy and using us to get through them. Using us and our children in order to basically get back at the other person in power, right? And I think that more than anything is kind of, that. Now for Russia though, they kind of have a vested interest in making sure climate change does happen. So I can't really blame the Russian government too much for wanting to make climate change a thing, and trying to get Republicans to get on board with that. But I will tell the Republicans, if you notice how climate change impacts agricultural things, you'll notice that the American Southeast and the Texans area is kind of the most negatively impacted. I think the California thing is. I would want to see where the California thing came from, though, because it doesn't make sense that California would be green, considering how dry it's been out there. I don't think climate change is going to help it become wetter or produce more. But a lot of the tundra areas, you'll notice, are positive and in the green here. So as far as Russia trying to propagate the use of fossil fuels and carbon-emitting gases, two reasons for it. They'll obviously come out on top when it comes to agriculture, and on top of that, they pump out more gas. Their economy is very fuel dependent. So, it's one of those things where, they're not going to worry about the planet too much, because if the planet does go into the negative factors, they're one of the biggest benefactors of the whole frickin' shebang if climate change does become a reality. Whereas in the United States, not so much. Depends on where you live. Thankfully, I'm in Buffalo, which is, not on the coast. But still, it's going to have a negative impact. And the thing of the matter is that for people looking towards the future, you get a lot of cynicism no matter where you go these days, and I think that can have a negative impact on birthing rates. It's like, well, you don't know when the economy's going to do. You're not in control of anything. You have to plan. You can barely plan for yourself and your spouse, no less, a young one. And that inability to plan around those young ones. China is dealing with the same issue. I guess they just said that they can have 3 kids, but most people are like, we can't have 3 kids. Like, you can't afford 3 kids. Like, that's just impossible. Whereas, like, back in the 1980s in America, most people had 3 kids. It's like I have 2 siblings. Like most of my nieces and nephews had 2 or 3 plus. But my generation is basically, 1 or 2 maybe, but most other people don't have any. I don't have any. So it's like correlation does not equal causation. There are furries who have children, right? I know a few furries who have had kids and are raising a family. So it's not necessarily that furries themselves are anti-family. It's that, when it was like, what would a father fear most? Their child running into random furry crap online, or their child growing up in a place where, that has gone basically to hell in a handbasket because we overexploited our planet to the point where there's no oxygen to breathe. There's nothing good to inherit anymore, because we've burned all the bridges that we possibly could because of our governments, right? I think most people's concern would be from the actions or inactions of the government rather than what furries are doing online in their spare time. Most sane people, anyway. Most people who are extreme, they may worry about the furries a little bit. But anyways, that's just my thought on it. Thank you very much for watching tonight. Kick that like, kick the subscribe button, kick a comment in the comment section. What is your opinion on that? Are you a Russian anthropomorphic fan? If so, don't leave any comments in the comment below, except for if you wish to, but don't call yourself furries. You have permission, right? There's a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't. It's like, I'm not a furry. I just like anthro characters. Russian folks, Russian furs, and any furs that are in the countries that would see furry as being directly tied to GLBT, even though they're not exactly directly tied together. They're not like at the hip. It's not like they don't say LGBTF, right? Furries are not in that particular group of folks. They they just go to bat for those particular group of folks on social media a lot. I would say if you're in one of those countries where GLBT is seen as is very, very hostile, I would say, yeah, absolutely. If your government starts to think that furries are tied to so directly with the queer community, please X-nay on the Uri Fae, okay? But anyway, stay safe out there. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next week for more news. Hopefully better news. Thank you very much. Have a good one, guys. All right.